name is Antanan Fofana. I am 22 years old, and I am currently a nursing student in Fortis College. And today I will be discussing something very important. I wanted to bring something to light that kind of concerns social awareness and social statuses based off of gender roles, and that's what my speech is going to be about today. Okay, so now, in a technologically advanced world, that we have today in the social media, and people's outlook on women in general has become more, acceptable. We're a lot better than the older generation, but these days people are still, overcoming certain barriers in other parts of the world that aren't as advanced as the U.S., so I just kind of wanted to bring light to that. And I know what you're thinking. You're kind of like, oh, well, it's 2020, it's about freedom, rights, feminism, women's right. But that's not quite, that isn't the issue for most places in the world. And so I just kind of wanted to bring light to that. And so with this speech, I just kind of wanted to, first of all, present like the main question that I have about this, which is, how does society view women, and what roles do women play to further solidify these presumptions that people have of them when it comes to society and stereotypes and all of that. And I've kind of put it down to like 4 categories. And this isn't, I know it's like a vague topic. It's a very vague topic, and you can kind of go anywhere with that. But I decided to put in different perspectives, not just, like the main perspective that you have of, women, like we're hardworking, this and that, I kind of wanted to put in different perspectives from different parts of the world. I wanted to put in some traditional views, some religious views, and whatnot. And so I first wanted to start out with the stereotypes versus the psychological, viewpoint of this. And the concept behind most gender stereotypes has to do with what we were taught when we were very little, which was, when it comes to the boys, they kind of go out and just hang out with their dad. You kind of heard of the phrase, boys will be boys, and with the girls, they usually stay with their moms, stay in the kitchen, hold the house down. That's kind of what we were taught when we were, little kids. And all those stereotypes might have a bit of truth to them, however, but, as we're growing up and as we're starting to realize that some of those ways of thinking might actually be detrimental to our children, more than we think it does. But it has some truth to it, but I feel like in a way we kind of need to steer away from that, and we have been doing that. But subconsciously, I think since we were all taught that at a young age, we kind of still keep it in the back of our psyche a little bit when it comes to certain things that we allow women to do and certain things that we allow men to get away with, growing up. And so I kind of wanted to get into this article as well that I've read, which is called The Secret Life of a Woman. And the author actually explains it really, really well. She says that women usually attach their emotions with their memories as a defense mechanism, and I think in a way what she means by that is that most of women's decisions are all based off of memories and feelings and stuff like that. It kind of reminds me back to a quote that I've heard a while ago, and which is I think it goes somewhere down the line of, people will not remember what you said to them, but they will remember how you made them feel. And so with that being said, women are more in touch with their emotional side. Some can say that that's also a good thing, because that means that they're very intuitive with their choice of judgment, their ways of thinking. They kind of like to assimilate things, and they like to pay attention to detail, So with that also being said, women don't differentiate by time. They just kind of, they go with the flow, they go with their intuition, they go with their gut feeling, There was also another article, it was made by Goodman, and he was also explaining about when it comes to men and how women deal with social issues and social problems. He was kind of talking about how when it comes to men, they think more with their head, they're thinking more at that moment, whereas with women, they take a little bit more time, they're more hesitant with their stuff. It takes them a lot longer. They don't just think about, oh, I'm just going to go towards something. We're not very, forward with our mindset. We kind of like to take a little bit of, what is the word? I'll just say we like to think about things a lot, and we think about multiple things at the same time. So, for instance, if I was to get an advice from someone, I wouldn't just stick with what they said. I'd go to multiple people and I'd try to pick out probably the best answer or the best advice that applies to me as a woman. Okay, and so we'll go a little bit further to the traditional views. Well, generations ago, women were always defined as the weaker sex compared to men in some countries. For instance, the 13th century, women were seen as a symbol of weakness, temptation, and evil. And I think most of these ideas kind of came from the Christian / Catholicist, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but the Catholic views on the story of Adam and Eve. Everybody's already heard about that. The whole Eve, attempted, I guess, or hoaxed or manipulated Adam to eat the forbidden fruit. Sorry, excuse me. But being that women were created, kind of from the man's rib and all that type of stuff. I mean, I'm not a Christian, so I don't know much about it. But it also says that as little kids, I'll kind of go back to, what I was talking about before with women and men's role kind of being defined from childhood, where the guy takes parts and stuff, and then the woman also takes part in that. And I guess the traditional views and the religious views has to do more with that. If you're based off of that foundation, if you have that foundation in your head already, growing up as a woman, it kind of defines how you're going to live your life, or how you're expected to live your life, through the views of your parents or the people that are surrounding you, or your community that you come from. And not everybody comes from a liberal family, or not everybody comes from open-minded community. Some people are still in their ways about certain things, and it comes from that. It's from the religious and the traditional views. And with that being said, in other parts of the world, like India, by law, women are actually to be covered up from head to toe when they're in front of a man, other than their husbands. And that's the same thing that applies to the Middle East. But with some places in the world, women aren't really allowed to inherit things. They mostly get their sense of freedom after marriage. So when the woman leaves her father's house and goes into the home of the husband, that becomes her provider, her caregiver, her sense of, her sense of security, but at the same time, her sense of pride, because they teach women at a young age that, you're not really fully a woman until you become someone's wife and someone's mother. And back then, education wasn't really a must for women, and there are other parts that women do actually own properties, and they can inherit things from their parents, like the Middle East. Surprisingly, I know, in the news, they always talk about, women in the Middle East, they're always oppressed, or their husbands always beat them. There's domestic violence going left and right. They always cover their head because they're depressed, and it's not a religious choice, which is actually not the case. So in Middle East, actually, women can own property and claim individual freedom by marriage, and religion also has a major role into the woman's life, you know, and it gives them a sense of purpose. Now, with the author Judy Cofer, she had another article. It's called The Myth of a Latin Woman. And she says that she was kept under surveillance since virtue and modesty by culture equation was the same thing as family honor, which is kind of what I was talking about. When in some places in the world, you know, a woman's chastity and purity is seen as like a sense of honor for the family and for their loved ones. Because let me just correlate it with the same quote where it says a woman's body is a temple. You know, you honor the temple, you cherish the temple, you pray in the temple. But once that's kind of diminished through acts of fornication or have not, a woman is kind of seen as dirty, and like her status or her virtue is kind of lowered. And so some families, I know, in fear of that, they become very protective of their daughters. They become very protective of their wives. And, you know, it's not always the case, but most of the time, you know, that also plays a big factor into how women are viewed from the age of, I'll say, from the age of maybe 14, 15, 16 growing up. You know, they kind of have it in their mind, okay, she's ready for marriage. You know, she should be focusing on how to start a family, or she should be focusing on other things that has absolutely nothing to do with getting your own house, getting your own property and stuff like that. And even if you own your own properties in the Middle East, it still is a must to want to build a family. So what else? We will move on to other things such as history of women's rights. Okay, the women of the older generation contributed a lot to this world, actually, which gave the new generation like us to look forward to. You know, feminists such as Olympe de Gaulle, I might be saying that wrong, but she published the Declaration of Rights for Women during the French Revolution, you know. And so politically, many feminists believe that the cooperative society based off of social economic principles would respect the rights of women. So she says. Okay, but she wasn't completely wrong in her statement, but like I said before, it really doesn't apply to everyone, but that's just one aspect of how you can see people's views on women's rights. And to my knowledge, I don't think everybody was very acceptable or susceptible to women's rights as a whole, because at that time they were just starting the foundation of this big movement that ended up being, you know, so prominent and very admirable in today's modern world when it comes to women. And so women in the United States during the 19th century organized and participated in a lot of reforms, movements, and education, such as banning alcohol and freeing slavery during the civil rights movements. You know, in 1872, the Prohibition Party became the first national political party to recognize the rights of suffrage for women in its platform, which is amazing. You know, but along with that movement, many other women helped to contribute a lot into this world. And so I'll say it's a great thing they're doing. You know, we got to keep it up. But then now I want to shift gears from women's rights to something that probably not a lot of people think about, but I kind of wanted to put this, you know, last but not least, marriage and divorce, the impact that it has on women. A great union between a man and a woman, some people, you know, view it as a healthy marriage. But what people don't tell them, is the imbalance that happens when both people separate and who has to pick up the pieces, And there's a lot of times where I've personally witnessed that there is an imbalance, especially when it comes to children who have to deal with parents separating or being divorced. And I've often seen that the mother's always the one that's picking up the slack, or you always have a lot of stories of the single mother that's out there struggling, and they have children that are kind of affected by that. And most often the time, I'm not going to say that all men are like this, but the man usually, walks away, and they even have like a term for it, as a deadbeat dad or whatever. It's not to say that women don't do that as well, but when society's viewpoint of a single parent, 9 times out of 10 will always be the mother that's staying at home or going to work, trying to make it work, so that way the child doesn't feel like it's abandoned or doesn't feel as loved, just because he doesn't have, or he or she, isn't having both parents sitting in the same home, making things work out or whatnot. It could be due to one or two or multiple issues. But due to the misconceptions of having a 50-50 relationship with a spouse, leads me to thinking that in marriage, there are no perfect solution, because it's only a figure of a fool's imagination. So in the end, the woman is at loss, which can sometimes make an unhappy marriage, and sometimes it could lead to divorce. And in Times News, on the article, it specifies that 69% of women are the first to initiate divorce, but due to the income rate dropping for them, single mothers find it hard to keep up with financial demands, and most children may either struggle in school or live a fairly difficult life without a father figure. And that's what it says in the article, which is kind of what I talked about earlier, but I was kind of stumbling on my words. But yeah, the impact that it has on the children, usually when there's always just one parent that's taking care of them. It's not always the case, but yeah. So in my opinion, women have a choice to, live a simple life, where they can be independent, work on their own, get their own money. But it's not always the case. I mean, it doesn't always end like as a happy ending. Sometimes you just have to deal with the type of situations that you're given, or circumstances, which just kind of want to pull everything back in, and just say it in one big nutshell. Like, for centuries, women have been the backbone of many nations and the foundation of the future. So in spite of some nations' acceptance with women's freedom to choose their path, other women are still fighting to have their voices heard, But on the bright side, there are occasions when women take the day to appreciate other women in their lives, which is Mother's Days, but I feel like people should celebrate and appreciate women every day, okay? And if there's one word that I would define women as, is, I would say they're very, very, very strong. They're very independent, we're really, really, really great beings, and they should be appreciated. And so, yeah, that is the end of my speech, and I hope you appreciate it. Thank you.